Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Want to, first of all, thank the board for their unanimous support of a previously approved board item, H10. That item really spoke volumes as it relates to our commitment and our conviction as a board and the superintendent as the educational leader, and quite frankly, our position from a policy perspective relative to improving levels of inclusion, specifically diversity and underrepresented groups. I think the Disparity Study 2 really illuminates even further and amplifies our narrative around the need to be proactive and be very deliberate and intentional. And item H10 at the August meeting really provides some additional parameters and guardrails to ensure that we stay on course as it relates to federal stimulus funds that will be provided to this district. That being said, I had a great conversation with Mr. Torrance and Mr. Steiger. I want to commend them and the superintendent for the revisions on some of these items, but I do have a series of questions that I want to clarify for the record, starting with E145, Madam Chair. On the funding source, it says various. H10 did provide some expectations for funding sources to be explicitly stated in the article with the spending authority and other financial related indicators, but this particular provision on E145 stipulates various. It says that it may or may not include federal stimulus funds. However, I need some clarification as relates to various, because am I very clear that there will be no federal stimulus funds associated with the purchases outlined in E145? There will be no federal stimulus funds associated with the purchases outlined in E145. Through the chair, is that what I'm understanding?
Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, no, not for E145. In E145, there are some of these purchases will be through stimulus funds, and that's why the language is amended on the front page. This is just the bridge. We lowered that amount. If you recall, the first was that it was...
Just clarification, on E145, there was a revision?
Yes, E145 has been revised.
Okay, I just spoke through the chair. I just spoke with the chief of staff, the deputy superintendent, Mr. Torrance, because I did not see a revision to E145, and he indicated that it was not revised because it did not involve stimulus funds. So that's why I got up from my chair to get some clarification. So what you're representing, what I'm looking at, and what Mr. Torrance just told me 8 minutes ago don't square.
Yes, through the chair. I apologize, Dr. Gallen. I didn't have it in front of me when we spoke. I had actually printed a copy. I was hoping to get it up to you before this item was brought up for discussion, but it actually was revised to reflect the discussion that Mr. Steiger, you and I had, and we gladly provide a revised copy to you.
Okay, Madam Chair, may I have a revised copy so that I'm looking at, because I know the revisions did come in. I got the other revisions, but for some reason I don't have that one. Great. So great. Thank you, Mr. Steiger. Thank you, Mr. Torrance, for that clarification. So with respect to the revision to E145 and the spirit and intent of H10, can you speak to the amount that was identified in the previous item prior to the revisions and the amount that will now be available for competitive bidding on this particular item pursuant to H10, the delta between those particular items pre and post revision?
Yes, Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, this is it is at least for this money is now solely focused just for 21-22. In prior, it was for the remainder of the original contract plus the extension years. So that's a $21 million versus a $7 million. So you are approving right now a supplemental for $7 million, and the original item had a supplemental for $21 million in total. So the difference being $14 million.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. May I follow up? Sure. Yes, thank you. That squares. Thank you, Mr. Steiger. That exactly squares with the notes that I had on the original item that I just showed Mr. Torrance. So the 14 million is money for the listening public. Prior to the revision of this particular item, the $14 million would not be available for competitive bidding through the chair. Am I correct, Mr. Steiger, just for the public's edification?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, yes, that 14 million was anticipated to go through the public procurement that had already taken place, not the new one that we will do because of H10.
Okay, follow up, Madam Chair? So now, for the listening public, with the revision has now educed $14 million that will be available for competitive bidding through the chair.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, so I started out with the commendations to the board, I followed up with commendations to the superintendent and also to Mr. Torrance and Mr. Steiger, because what we have now yielded in the revision of E-145 is an additional $14 million that our local and minority and whatever businesses can compete for. I want to be very clear. This is about competition. You juxtapose that with some of the provisions that may be available through Disparity Study 2. This may be an enhancement for our community partners, community vendors, community businesses. And this item is for audio-visual equipment, supplies, and installation services. An additional $14 million will be available to compete in this particular space. So when myself and other board members, most notably Dr. Bendros Mendengal and myself, are often told that there's a dearth of ready, willing, and able, we're making this pronouncement right now that you need to stay engaged, you need to communicate with the district, you need to prepare yourself to go through the process, because there's an additional $14 million that has been yielded based on this particular revision and pursuant to the action outlined in H10. I do want to make a note, Mr. Steiger. I don't know if the one you have, the revised E-145 you just gave me, under fund source, still stipulates various, but you indicated that on some of the items it does stipulate that it's going to be the fund. So we've had a conversation about this, and I think H10 was rather clear that we would like to have some enumeration of what funds, specifically when we're talking about federal stimulus funds, to enumerate those so that we can have a record of how these funds are being potentially utilized. You did it on some of the others, but for some reason it was not done on this one. So on E-147, for example, you did stipulate that, and I know that item is not before us. Madam Chair, I'm done with E-145. I'll wait till you get to the next items to follow up with my questions. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Benjamin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank my colleague for being so diligent. And of course, reading more than once. I want to thank you, Dr. Gallen. I think we talked a good while back, about sometimes we have community members who are MIA. And for those of you who don't know, and I know you do, the listening audience, the viewing audience, that's missing in action. And that came from a long time ago conversation Dr. Gallen and I had about MIA. He brought that to my attention. He said, you know, Honorable, sometimes our people, please come to your board meetings and have your say. You deserve it. When you talk among yourselves, that's good, but you're going to get more done if you show up and talk to us. And if someone said, if you can't stand the heat, get out the kitchen, well, we're going to stay in the kitchen. That's why we are here. And you are appreciated for bringing these kinds of concerns and issues to our attention. But we feel okay seeing you come down. Dr. Gallen, this item, 145, I took a look at it on page 2 of 4, and I recognize some of the names, and I'm delighted. I recognize that we're getting more involvement from our Asian American community members. It is important. I'm a firm believer that when you're fair and you're giving all an opportunity to participate, it's going to make us all safer. Please remember that. Please remember that. We did the disparity study because we knew that there were disparity opportunities, non-opportunities for many of the people who should be a part of being involved. So again, Dr. Gallen, thank you for your diligence. And of course, thank you, Mrs. Steiger, for always being ready to explain. That's why we are here. Again, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Any board member or anything else? No? We go to E146. E146, I have a public speaker, Brian Farrell. Is Mr. Farrell here? E146 is request approval of supplemental award and invitation to bid number ITB-18-034-DP, IT hardware, equipment, accessories, peripherals, and support. Ms. Santos, you're down for this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm taking this opportunity as it's one of the only ways that we can communicate as a board, right? To take a second, it's peripherally related to this item, to speak on the digital divide. You've all heard me talk about this from day one. My first meeting, I talked about this on the dais. And it's been a journey since day one for me in this role to really understand what it looks like to set up our teachers and students for success in this arena. I've become aware of significant and serious gaps in our current offering. And I bring this up as we invest a historic amount to tackle this issue. I appreciate staff meeting with me and the superintendent having conversations with me. And I think there are 3 specific aspects that we can hone in on for the digital divide. There are many more, but 3 that are most important and core. Getting a device to each child, which I thank our staff and our team for being visionaries and leading many, many years ago before it was necessary because of COVID to get there. The second one being device capacity and capability to perform at the level that our students and teachers need. And of course, the third, updating our Wi-Fi connectivity so students and teachers can access the programs that they need. Board members, I think some of you have direct experience with this, maybe with your children, and understanding and sitting down what it looks like for a student. And I think our student advisor can probably shed some light on this. When I, as a student, start my class, I turn on my device. I have my MDCPS device. I open Chrome to go to my portal. And maybe now I have to go to Schoology to get into my assignment. Maybe that assignment includes a YouTube video. If I open that YouTube video, I am now using about half of the short-term memory that my device can handle in those very basic first steps of what a student needs to do today. Let's say I am quarantined because of the current situation. I also have to open Zoom. And at that point, with our minimum specs, I am pretty much at a halted speed. I'm not just saying this because it's a hypothetical. This is what happens, and certainly has happened to me, helping Gabby, my little cousin, do homework, and we end up on her cell phone doing her homework. We know there's a small minority of students for whom very basic applications are all that is needed. And for them, sure, the specs of years ago may work. But I bring this up because we know that in today's world, not providing internet connectivity that's reliable and a device that's capable is the equivalent of shutting the schoolhouse door down. And I know, like me, many of you are in our classrooms, and maybe you witness this too. You go up to a student and you say, hey, how's your assignment? They're on their computer, and they tell you, I'm on my hotspot, my personal cell phone hotspot, because that's how unreliable their school connection is. I thank staff for their updates on the work that they're doing and the upcoming changes that are happening. And I thank the board for leading on this. María Teresa we have a whole technology committee that's kicking off. I'm so excited for the work that will happen there, and for all the changes that are coming, and thank the board for the investments that have been made. And certainly while E-146 does not address what I'm talking about, the item that I plan to bring to next month's meeting will. And I say all this because I want to ensure that you're aware and you have some time to maybe see what the situation is like for you before next month, so that we can have your support on this very important issue that is now core to student learning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Santos. Dr. Galvin, sir?
Yes, through the chair, I want to thank my colleague, Ms. Santos, for those comments. It speaks to two elements that I've had a discussion about and that I have some experience with, and that is really the fulcrum of considering the end user. What you just articulated is something that transcends the specifications in numbers and letters, but what does that actually look like to a student? What does that look like to a parent? I noticed when you said some of us have experience, absolutely, I know you've seen it. What does that look like? With respect to some of the modifications in this item, I think you are spot on, because that is some of the conversations that I had relative to the initial concerns about utilizing specs, if you will, criteria from 3, 4, 5 years ago, when the educational landscape, when the pedagogical landscape, when the modality landscape has dramatically shifted. And that's an opportunity for us to not only provide for expanded competition, but as you indicated, look at the specs. Because what we were looking at doing 5 years ago, what we were going to be compelled, our students, our parents, our families, our district, our teachers, our principals, our board members, our superintendent, what we contemplated 3 to 4 to 5 years ago in an initial RFP has dramatically changed. And I want to just thank you for very simply illuminating that, because that was a conversation relative to do we stay lockstep with what we contemplated 3, 4, 5 years ago, or do we pivot to the realities both from a utilization standpoint, both from a competitive standpoint, both from an ethos of diversity standpoint, but what you illuminated was the most significant piece, most importantly from an end user standpoint. So I trust that staff was listening, because that was a conversation not to the level of detail that you mentioned, but there was this thought that if you explore competition, you may have to do it at the abdication of what you currently have. That abdication may be a necessary evil, because what you currently have may be insufficient based on current and future expectations and realities. So I want to thank you for highlighting that, and I trust, and I'm going to put that in my toolbox as relates to why it is important for us to explore competition and put it out there, and really it comes down to specs. What are the specifications moving forward, as they may not be the same specifications 4 or 5 years ago. So I want to thank you for that comment, and I totally share that sentiment, and I look forward to what you plan to extend in this particular discourse. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on E-147? I apologize, yes. Dr. Gallen, are you finished with E-146? Dr. Gallen, in E-146?
Yes, just through the chair. Same question, Mr. Steiger, so you could anticipate. With respect to E-146, the revised language did not reference H10, but I see that it's referenced ESSER COVID funds, that you're not utilizing COVID funds. So on E-146, are you not utilizing any federal stimulus funds on E-146 as stipulated in this item?
So, Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, the supplemental will not be utilizing ESSER funds in any way. The original item, the original purchase did, which is why the fund source says various, but the supplemental will not reference, will not use ESSER funds in any way.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, E-146. Okay.
You finished, sir?
Yeah, for E-146, yes, ma'am.
Yes. We move to E-147.
Madam Chair, I think the student advisor had their hand up.
I apologize.
Yes, Ms. White.
Yes,
Go
thank
ahead.
you, Madam Chair. I truly just wanted to address what Board Member Santos was saying about connectivity issues, and I can definitely tell you from a student perspective, I have experienced connectivity issues, and I can say that even school officials, school personnel, teachers, even when it comes to small things such as submitting attendance, they may have to do it manually because they can't do it electronically because of connectivity issues. So I applaud you, Board Member Santos, on bringing this as an item for the next board meeting, because that's something that's very important. And I can even say that Mr. Harvey just had connectivity issues with the internet in this building. So thank you so much, and I really applaud you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. And I don't want to ever forget calling on you, so what you can do before each board meeting, you can submit the items that you would like to speak on to my office, and I will be happy to have you on my list.
Thank you.
Thank you. E-147. E-147 is request approval of supplemental award and invitation to bid number ITB-19-071-MJ, HVAC parts and supplies manufacturer discount. Dr. Gallen, sir, is your item.
Yes,
No,
Madam
it's your
Chair.
item, I'm sorry. You're
I
going to
signed
speak
up
on the item.
Yes, ma'am. E-147, through the chair, I again want to thank my colleagues for their support of H10 from August 18th. This is another item that reflects a delta based on H10 that now provides additional opportunities for the public. So through the chair, Mr. Steiger, from the original item to the revised, can you tell me what is now the additional amount of money that will be now available for competitive bidding, through the chair?
Yes, Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, the original supplemental amount that was requested was $30 million. The new supplemental amount being requested is just for 21-22, the bridge to get us to where we need to go, and that is $15 million. So to go back to your E-145 equation, this is $15 million that will be put out to bid because of H10.
Thank you, Mr. Steiger, through the chair. And E-147, for the listening public, again, is HVAC parts and supplies. HVAC parts and supplies. And H12 today passed on consent. That is an item that the board has unanimously supported to look at our HVAC systems in the Miami-Dade County Public Schools from Florida City to County Line Road, and many of the challenges that we had. So this item was critically important, and the bridge of $15 million is definitely great, but equally important, the additional $15 million that will be out there to be competitively bidded is equally important and equally opportunistic. It's opportunistic, through the chair, specifically because on the current E-147, I can stand corrected, I did not identify any African-American vendor on the current E-147, through the chair.
Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, I believe that's correct. I'll check now, but I believe you were correct.
So for the record, through the chair, on E-147, an item that initially had a $30 million opportunity, had no African-American vendors. Whether or not it's about ready, willing, or able, it is inconsistent with this board's policy position the conviction of our administration and the tremendous efforts that we've made over the past several years, and equally important, what has now been confirmed through Disparity Study 2. So initially, this would have been a $30 million award, without one African-American vendor on the agenda. It's now going to be a $15 million award, which is necessary, but now there will be additional $15 million out to be competitively bidded. And hopefully we will bolster our efforts, amplify our voices, and potentially identify what I'm sure Dr. Bendross-Mendengal and other board members know are some viable African-American vendors that can do this work, So that is on E-147, an additional $15 million that will be now available for competitive bidding. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. I just wanted to make sure that I heard you right. Out of $50 million, you said?
Through the chair, I'm sorry, 15.
Yes. But
Yes.
what is the original figure that you mentioned?
The original, through the chair, the original item prior to the discussion, the meeting, the engagement, the conversation in committee, the original amount that this board would have approved would have been for $30 million
Yes.
without one African-American on the award. Now it's going to be 50, it was cut in half. We still have to continue operations, but now it's $15 million. But the original, without the discussion, without the leadership, the engagement, the support of this board, we would have been, I guess, complicit in awarding $30 million that may or may not have been immediately necessary. Obviously, it's not. Obviously, it's not. The $30 million, obviously, Mr. Steiger is referencing a bridge. That's the language that I kind of used with him, Mr. Torrance. What is the bridge amount? Do you need the full $30 million now? Or can you spend $15 million now as a bridge and provide an opportunity for equity, for fairness, for inclusion, for diversity, for transparency, for competition, for greater efficiencies with the other $15 million? This item's revision says the answer is yes. The answer is yes, and we have now done better by the process, we've done better by the district, and we've done better by people who are often left out of this particular economic opportunity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I want to
Thank
hear
you,
the
thank
answer.
you. Yes, Dr. Bendross-Mendengal.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Gallen. I would like to hear an answer. I think there was a question there. Am I right? Or the last statement, was it a question or a statement?
Through the chair. The question I was answering was Ms. Hammond, but it was a statement. It was probably part of a sermon too. But
I'm very concerned. Thank
yes,
you.
yes, ma'am.
Through the chair. Thank you, Dr. Gallen. And when you mentioned the words ready, willing, and able, I'm going to have to do something. You know, at one time I knocked on doors to insist that children would come to school. Maybe I'm going to have to knock on doors to make sure that we get the people in for them to apply and do whatever. Life isn't easy, and I can understand, probably understand, that when something, life is difficult. And sometimes I'm sure that to go through what some of, as Dr. Gallen just mentioned, folk who are considered minority, and they are not, don't get to the table. So they've got to do whatever is absolutely necessary, because you have some people on this board, if you knew their history and their background, you would wonder, how did they make it to where they are? But it's not easy. So thank you very much, Dr. Gallen, for again taking a closer look at what we're doing. And the question becomes, again, as you always say, Dr. Dorothy Bendross-Mendengal, you asked the question, can we do better? And the answer is always yes. So thank you again, Madam Chair, and
Thank you.
Dr. Gallen.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anything else in 147? If not, we move to 148. E-148 is request approval of supplemental award, an invitation to bid number ITB-19-018-HR, HVAC, and controls replace, supply, and/or install. Dr. Gallen, you're down for this item too.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow up again, the original item Mr. Steiger, if you can give me the amount of the original item and the now reduced amount in the revision, what is the difference that will now be available for the community to compete? And I'll stipulate what is this for. This is for HVAC and controls, replace, supply, and/or install through the chair. What is the difference in the original and now this amount in the revised?
Sure, Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen. The original amount requested was for $20 million, and the revised amount is now $10 million.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Steiger. So I'm not going to go through I think everybody's starting to get the message. This is an additional $10 million that had we approved the original item, and we've not had the discourse with the superintendent, with the administration, with the board and committee, and we didn't make the modifications necessary, we would have been approving $20 million without the opportunity for additional competition. And second question, are there any African Americans reflected on this particular item through the chair?
No, Madam Chair, Dr. Gallen, there is no African Americans, many SBEs and MBEs, and MWBs, but no African American firms.
Okay, just want to restate the question. There were no African Americans that would have been a part of this award had it been $20 million as it stands. No African American vendors, so I hope they're listening. Okay, so now there's an opportunity, a $10 million opportunity pursuant to E-148. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Benjamin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Comment and then a question. According to my notes, 20-plus vendors responded to this invitation to bid ITB to replace, supply, and install HVAC equipment. And I find it a bit disturbing that there is still no representation from the African American vendors. If the funds are there, the services are needed, and the vendors are qualified, we cannot continue to stifle the advancement and progression of our African American vendors. Now the question, how was this ITB solicited? I'm aware that the estimated requirements were previously awarded by the board, but this is a perfect example of what cannot continue to happen. If we have the funds, these vendors have the credentials, we need to make for certain that everyone has a fair shake. There is enough for everyone, but I see the same vendors continuously being selected. This isn't all about money. It usually sometimes is. It's about an opportunity for us to be better collectively. How was this ITB solicited? Maybe you did say it, but we have an audience that's listening and, of course, viewing what we do on the board. So if that question can be answered, please.
Sure, Madam Chair, Dr. Benjamin Mendengal. This is not a new invitation to bid or solicitation in any way. So that we will have a new solicitation because of H10, because of that extra $10 million. We will have a new solicitation, which will, as Dr. Gallen said, be open. This solicitation was done years prior, so it was done in the same way we always do our invitations to bid, under the rules that were then in place. We will now use the rules in place now and do a new bid under H10.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
And so for the listening audience and the viewing audience, they will know how that is done, or again, how will they know that it's done?
So, Madam Chair, Dr. Benjamin Mendengal, we will make sure that not only do we use the normal channels for this particular type of procurement. Ms. Andrea is sitting directly behind me, which I like. It feels supported. But we will make sure together, both procurement office and the OEO, to ensure that for these, we do this for every item, but for these in particular, we will have an extra outreach to ensure that any of the bids that we put out again because of H10, that we get out into the community and let them know. And of course, we'll rely on board members to help us get that word out too.
We make the big bucks to do just that. Thank you so much, Mr. Steiger. And this morning, we honored Deborah Toomer from WMBM. She will be very helpful in making sure that the word gets out. Thank you again. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Nobody else in 148? If not, we move. Yes, sir, Dr. Gao?
Yes, just follow up, Madam Chair. I did sign up for E-149,
Yes.
but I'm not going to speak on E-149. I think my commentary has resonated enough. I just would like to make some final comments. I know through the chair, Mr. Steiger has referenced H-10. This was an item that I proffered, but this item belonged to the Assembly, and it was unanimously supported. So when we look at policy positions that we take to do the things that are right, rightful, and righteous, this is what we yield. This is what we yield. On 3 items alone,
Right.
H-10 parenthetically is about how we're going to utilize federal stimulus funds, which we did a previous item that yielded, that's going to infuse $1.1 billion. $1.1 billion. Some of it is going to be in goods and services. You juxtapose that with disparity study 2. That will now give us some of the protections that we need to do what is right, rightful, and righteous. What is right, rightful, and righteous, and consistent with board policy and the paradigm that this district has adopted and has demonstrated. It's an uphill battle, we know that, but I just want to simplify something that is very magnanimous. 3 items, E-145, E-147, E-148. Juxtapose that with H-10 that this board approved, and the leaning in on this issue over the past 7-8 days, communicating with the administration, engaging in committee with the board, we have now yielded out of 3 board items an additional $39 million in opportunities for people to compete. An additional $39 million. Not for H-10, not for the engagement and questioning and briefing and committeeing and meeting and discussing. $39 million would have been approved in total today. That will not be available for competitive bidding. That will not be an opportunity available for an African American small minority vendor or some of the existing partners. Competition is what it is. But we're trying to create a space for those who don't feel left out, but the disparity study phase 2 says they are left out. This is not about feelings, this is not about emotions, but it is an emotional situation. But that can be substantiated by rational data. In God we trust, and all others bring data. The data doesn't lie. We have significant underrepresentation issues, and yes, those underrepresented communities, they're going to have to put their shoulder to the wheel of this work too. As Dr. Bendros-Mendenhall said, nobody gave us anything. Success comes before work only in the dictionary. That's because D comes before S. I mean, S comes before W, I'm sorry. You get it. So I just want to applaud my colleagues. I want to applaud the superintendent and his staff. But I want to use this as Exhibit A of what a board leaning into these issues can do, of what a board agenda item or policy position can yield for a community. So I submit to you Exhibit A with 3 board items, $39 million in less than 8 days. $39 million. So when you hear Miller 3 and those talking about forecasting, this is what this is about. So Ms. Andrea should right now be taking forecasting. This is a $39 million opportunity that OEO is going to have to lean in, dig deep, dive deep, and go out and explore some ready, willing, and able people who can respond competitively with the appropriate receipts, qualifications, and credentials to a potential opportunity of a $39 million pie. Thank you, Madam Chair.